You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. And this week we have a very special guest in the studio, someone I've been looking to have a chat with for, I reckon, about a year and a half now. And he's finally got some time to have a conversation about his life, his progress in the property industry. But I also think, factually, the largest, most impactful, most impressive development Perth will see and has seen this century. And for many decades to come, I believe it will be shaping the lifestyle of Western Australians, especially those looking to go to the footy and those looking to live around the river. It's none other than the Managing Director of Golden Group and the Golden Sadeo JV, Andrew Sugiaputra.
Good morning, Trent. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing really well, and very privileged and thankful for your time today. It's one that I'm very excited to have a conversation about. Let's get straight into, if we can, where a young Indonesian boy starts off moving to Perth from his hometown. How'd you get here, and what was the point of it for your parents? Was it for work? Was it for a different lifestyle?
It's actually for study. So my sister and my brother came to Perth in 1993, along with my mum. My dad and I followed through in 94. So it's been about 31 years since.
Where'd you move?
I started off living in Manning, remember 14 Forward Street, just next to Como High School. It's a strata, 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a study. I think we bought it for $180,000 by memory.
Yeah.
And we moved on from there.
I wonder what that's worth these days, hey? Looking at the property market. It would have been a fraction back then in 94, like most properties.
It's probably worth, I know, $800,000 plus now.
Yeah, most the units these days in Perth. And university in Perth as well?
Yep. Firstly, I went to Guildford Grammar for primary school in 1995. And then I went to Wesley College for high school before I started my civil engineering degree in UWA. So I'm glad to say I graduated with honors, even though it's second class, still honors nonetheless. So I finished off in 2004, and I started off as a civil engineer working for Vandermeer Group before they became VDM, which is quite interesting to see how the dynamics of the office actually changed from being a private company to a listed co. The whole dynamics just changed internally.
So even though you were born in Indonesia, you really are a Perth kid, aren't you?
100%. I love WA. Western Australia is my home.
Yeah.
I am for Team WA, so anything I can do for this state, which has obviously given me so much, not just for opportunities, but also in the health sector. My brother is actually a heart transplant recipient from Royal Perth in 2002. And we've been very grateful, and since then we have been quite active in the philanthropic activities.
Yeah, wow, there you go. I guess it's a story many would have shared, is growing up in Manning, going to Wesley and then going to university doing engineering degree and becoming a graduate. But there's not that many people that start in engineering with an interest in arts as well, and then ending up in property. What's the connection there? What tipped you into the property space? Was it work? Was it family?
Yeah, I love art since I was a kid. I love drawings. I love paintings. Back in high school, you needed to have one humanities subject to go to uni, and I took all the heavy fours, your chem, physics, calculus, applicable maths, I think it was, for year 12. And I took art as my humanity, and I got scaled down so much that I was still lucky to be able to get into UWA for my engineering. But yeah, I was probably the only engineer with a art sort of background to get into that degree. I love maths. Back in 97, me and my group actually came second in a competition called Matho Quest. I don't know whether it was still...
Matho Quest. Yeah.
And in year 10, 1998, my group came first. So we obviously then became the maths teacher's favorite back in Wesley. But no, look, I love maths. I've always enjoyed calculations. Took civil engineering degree. I've always known that I wanted to be an engineer since year 8. Back in 96, believe it or not. And after that, I ended up joining my family company only after 1.5 years stint as a civil engineer.
So what did the company look like back when you were 1.5 years past university? Obviously very different to what Golden Group is these days.
Yeah, when I joined, I believe we were probably only 6 to 7 people, including me and my parents. 2 accounts and one director that's still with me now, Stephen Tay. So he's been with us since before I joined. So he's part of the furniture, I would call it.
Yeah.
But we weren't that busy. Back then we had a few projects running. My parents just bought the previous Sands and McDougall building actually in Burswood when I joined. There was a project in Meadow Spring for about 100 lots, 80 of them strata and 20 green titles just in between the shopping centre and the golf course. And we were about to start a project in Maddington, just in front of what is now Centro Maddington Shopping Centre.
These are properties that people would take for granted these days as having probably been there forever, given that would have been 20-something years ago now. But back then, that was the land development that was going on. And by no means large projects in your scale these days, but they are still not small projects today. To be able to do a 100-lot development, I would suggest, is in the 0.1% even in property developers today. So that's quite a journey your parents had gone from themselves in moving to a new country, starting with a small triplex south of the river and then progressing their way up to 100 lots by the time you come out of university. Most mum and dad developers never get past a triplex in their life. That's quite an impressive run whilst you've got kids as well in a new country to be able to actually progress up to that point in complexity, let alone the financial outcome, to be doing projects that most would only dream of even at that stage.
Yeah, no, 100%. And look, full credits goes to my parents. They work hard. I actually hardly see them when I was growing up because they would come home really late. They would still have to entertain their guests. So we started off from a triplex subdivision, I believe it was in Belmont, that my parents started off, and just grew it from there. So my parents started off with a 3-lot subdivision in Belmont, and they took full advantage of the difference in terms of how you do business in Western Australia and how do you do business in Indonesia.
Explain that.
Probably this is back in the wild west back then. So
Pre-GFC?
Oh, way before then. Pre-Asian financial crisis even.
Yeah.
So they started off by perhaps back then putting in a small holding deposit, probably $1,000. They identified a 1,500, 1,800 square meter block that you can subdivide into 3 lots. They call it 150,000, so 50,000 per block. They found a builder. At that time, a house cost 120,000, Trent, so 170,000. They'll probably sell it for 200,000 back then, and they'll sell it to, say, Indonesian. And back then, it's quite usual for you to take a larger sum of deposit, and they use that deposit then to buy the land, and then they go and borrow and finance from the banks to build the houses, and then sell off the last one and make the profits then.
Well, cash flow is everything for property developers.
Yep.
I say often that what we do should be inherently profitable, and it's those risks along the way that you haven't been able to identify that would diminish that profit in the first place. Most of, I think, property development is not actually focusing on profit, it's focusing on mitigating risk. And cash flow is one of the major risks for most property developers, isn't it?
100%. I think cash flow and also holding power, Trent. So we always said that if you over leverage, then whoever you borrow money from are probably the only one that can really take your assets away from you. Legally, our group has always maintained a very conservative approach. In fact, up till today, we are extremely lowly geared. All of our land holdings now have no gearings, and the only financing that we undertake is just basically construction financing for each stage. Let's say $5 or $6 million, but each stage the output is about $18 to $20 million, so extremely low.
And so you guys would prefer JV equity or personal equity to go into a project over bank finance?
The metrics that we use as a group is actually quite interesting. We don't use IR as much because we are of the opinion that IR can be manipulated.
Well, time is a heavy manipulator on something that at the end of the day, if you make $1 million now or you make it in a year and a half, it's still yours. IRR really only matters if you're intent on recycling that money straight back into something else.
Correct. But if I tell you that the project will finish off in 5 years and it blows up by a year, your IRR drops quite significantly. So we don't use that metrics.
So you focus on margin?
We focus on profit on cost margins, and we use a calculation based on today's cost and today's pricing. So if it works today, chances are it's going to work next year or in 2 years' time.
I guess that margin is your fat for risk on sales risk in the future and cost risk.
Yeah, so it's mainly to mitigate cost risk. Back in the days, I think it was quite simple to manage your price escalation. Nowadays, since GFC and COVID, I should say, it's just getting unpredictable.
It's nearly impossible to forecast what you can sell something for, and it's just lucky over the last 5 years that lack of accuracy has actually been on the upside rather than the downside.
That's correct. Who would have predicted that construction costs would increase by 50, 60% in 5 years? And I suppose the previous business model for developers and builders alike are now broken because of that, because no one can basically predict that. And that's why you see a large number of builders has gone down. And it's not really their fault, but it's just the swing has been so severe that it caught a lot of people off guard.
And again, it goes down to cash flow, especially for these builders. Now, I would say that the biggest risk you want to mitigate in development is actually time risk, because time risk leads to market risk, right? But listening to you focusing on having such a low loan to value ratio in terms of how much debt you take on per project, I guess it's true that if you have such minimal debt, you therefore can be very patient with your sales strategy. And even if the market was to downturn, no one's forcing you to sell that asset at a price you don't want to sell it for, which is why I think you corrected me just earlier where I mentioned sales risk and construction risk, and you simply just focusing on construction risk, because you could wait to sell if you wanted to, if your money is patient enough.
That's correct. And chances are, from what I've seen in my career, we probably make more money waiting and timing the market for an upswing than selling as quick as possible. Let's say some of the projects that got delayed for whatever reason it was, let it be planning or market or GFC or COVID, ended up giving us more profit in the end, which is, you call it luck. But
it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Generally, you want to manage projects as fast as possible to mitigate all these risks of outcomes of time risk, such as market swings. But you're right, when I think about an infill development I did, it was a 2-hectare development, one of my earlier developments in our strategics story. That project created 36 lots around one cul-de-sac, and the profit on that project ended up being about $2 million. That was based on sales figures of about $540, $550 per square metre. Now, we rushed to get that out as fast as possible to return proceeds to the business and move on to the next project. But if I look back on that and think if I just held all that land for another 2 years, that would have sold for a profit that would have been more like $6 million.
Yep.
So to get that project as fast as possible, to recycle that money into a new project, the profit made between those two projects in that time frame would have actually been less than just waiting to sell for a higher figure in the market on the first project.
That's correct. And not taking into account your transaction costs as well, the taxes that you have to pay along the way, the stamp duty for you to pay on your next property after you've liquidated the first project and moving on to the second one. So that's exactly right.
It really speaks to the value of actually identifying your best assets and not just giving them away for the sake of it, holding them until you actually need to liquidate. Because value is value, whether it's in your bank account or it's sitting there on a book.
I suppose that's why we ended up moving towards and gravitating towards a longer term project trend. You can enjoy maybe 1 or 2 upswing in the property cycle, and if there is a downturn, so long as you're not over leveraged and you can hold on to it, and that goes to that holding power I mentioned earlier, chances are you'll be fine.
Let's talk about some of those projects along the way that have helped you learn those lessons. Obviously, it started with the smaller projects, moves to the 100 lots in Meadow Springs, but you created a few thousand lots in Victoria. You've essentially instigated the suburb of Whitby, south of Armidale, which without your instigation would have no urban master plan in the first place. And a lot of people would say, where's Whitby? What is it? And I'd love for you to explain it to people. But I'm sure along the way there, you've also learned those lessons through those multi-year, multi-stage projects.
Maybe I'll start off with right after I finished off as a civil engineer at VDM.
Sure.
When I joined my family company, again, we only had about 6 to 7 people, including myself and my parents. And when I had quite a lot of free time back then, I would actually scour around the West Australian and the Financial Review, because part of the reason why I quit as a civil engineer is because I wasn't learning anymore. I was so hungry, and scouring the West Australian and Financial Review, I would actually contact so many real estate agents let it be selling your supermarket, your commercial office building, your residential land, your industrial land, your development land. And I would get the information memorandum of all of these agents, and I would sign a confidentiality agreement. And I would tell them, look, maybe I'm a potential buyer. I've got investors coming in from overseas. At the time, I didn't have much backing back then. And the whole reason to get the CA is to be able to access the database, Trent. And once I've got an access to the database, I just downloaded all of the contracts and information, financing contracts. And I ended up learning and just reading, and I printed everything, knowing that I can't disclose, but it's just for my own reading anyway. And I would just learn, and I would read contracts, hundreds and thousands of pages to learn about the property industry that I didn't know much on.
Either Lord of the Rings or property contracts. You've got to read something, right?
Correct. And based on those information, I ended up knowing how to structure a leasing deal for an office commercial tenants. I ended up knowing how to calculate the market review if you ended up getting a Coles or Woolies coming in for your site. Ended up knowing how you should structure your financing when it comes to development land, commercial property, so on and so forth. So it's just purely based out of learning. So
watching the big guys do it and emulating that.
Yeah, 100%. And it was all free information, really. So that's how I learned.
That's a very smart way to do it, because the unfortunate thing about property development and the industry is that there is no yellow book for dummies on property development, and there's not many people outside of this podcast and a couple of other sources, I'd say, where people are genuinely happy to share their knowledge, because the more people that have the knowledge, the more people you're competing with in the industry as well. So it's counterintuitive to help and teach people, and often it comes down to having to go off your own back and find your own way to find information that is otherwise not in any way publicly available.
That's correct. I think there are information out there if you look hard enough, but perhaps nowadays it gets a little bit easier with AI and ChatGPT, but back then you would still have to read off that thick map, and you got to C15 and you got to memorize which turn to go in. But yeah, so that's where I started off. In terms of projects, naturally, then I ended up helping my parents with the subdivisions, again in Maddington and in Meadow Spring. We ended up selling, I think, the old Sensei McDougall building not long thereafter. And I think the biggest break was selling a parcel of land, and we used that proceed to go into Melbourne because Perth was overheating. And this was back in 2007 when people were offering lands at 1 million per hectare in Mandurah. And in the feasibility studies, they calculated that because last year increased 15%, hence next year should increase 15%. That's your profit margin, Trent. Yeah. And we said no to it. We used the money to go to Melbourne, ended up buying sites at around $180,000 to $200,000 per hectare, and then started developing there. Mind you, back in Melbourne back then, it was also tough going. I sold my very first land in Melbourne in 2009, 600 plus square meters in the western areas there, so western suburbs, but that's the cheapest area in Melbourne, not like in Dublin.
Yep.
And I was selling that particular lot for $89,000. I remember I made $3,000 profit, which is bugger all. But
you wouldn't go into it most of the time for that return. What was the point of it? Was it learning? Was it just exposure to another market?
Exposure to another market.
Made a lot of money on one property in Perth. That's a big gamble to go to a state you'd never developed in before and make such a small margin compared to what you're used to.
Yeah, but we ended up going cyclical, where when Perth market was overheating back in 2007, we ended up selling, and we put that money into the state that we thought was undervalued, which was Victoria back then. So
would you do it again?
I have actually been looking in Victoria recently, but the numbers still looks better in WA, believe it or not. Some of those properties in that corridor we've developed are now asking around $1.2 million, $1.4 million a hectare. The profit in terms of absolute dollar terms with Perth is probably similar, but in Perth you can get land for $600,000, $700,000 a hectare. So just from a pure metrics and percentage-wise, makes more sense to deploy your money in WA, despite the increases that a lot of us have enjoyed over the last 3 or 4 years.
Let's progress, if we can, past the Melbourne land subdivisions. What did you learn from that?
So I suppose in Melbourne, when we bought a couple of the developments, again, I would say we got quite lucky in getting to know the right people and the right team members, Trent. So again, all of this credit goes a lot to my team members, my consultants, and we managed to find great people along the way, Trent. And again, I would like to give credits to them, because without their help, I wouldn't be sitting here today speaking to you. In terms of the driver of acquisition, as you mentioned, Whitby, Vista, and Carnup, those are actually credit to my mother. She's almost like the spear, at the tip of the spear of the organization when it comes to acquisition. Because of my civil engineering background, I'm more cautious with my approach, so I tend to become sort of the even keel against my mum.
The pessimist, the realist?
Yeah, and it's the balancing, the counterbalance, if you want to call it that. So we actually have quite a lot of arguments when it comes to work at the office, so maybe some of my colleagues or staff members will get a little bit uncomfortable. But to be honest, when we go home, we have dinner on the same table. It's all the same. I'll say, "What's for dinner, Mum?" And sometimes she'll be cooking. So
there's the personal side where she's mum, and then there's the work side where she's, in many respects, as you've alluded to, the boss. Even though you're MD, mums will always be the boss. You mentioned Whitby. Whitby is a suburb that most people wouldn't have heard of, to be frank, south of Armidale, that up until the point where you guys transformed it into an urban outcome, it was pretty much just an offshoot of Serpentine, Mundajong, Cardup area and another rural residential suburb. What the hell were you guys thinking, buying a lot of land in what is the middle of nowhere and then trying to service it and turn it into a satellite suburb, small Ellenbrook?
It actually comes back to my early comment that we went in counter-cyclical. When we sold quite a lot of assets in WA to move to Melbourne, and then Melbourne overheated, and then WA went down, and we thought, wow, there's great values in WA property market. So we ended up scouring around Western Australia again in 2010 and 2011. That's when we did quite a lot of acquisition, including the Belmont Park Racecourse, which is now Burswood Point. We always go counter-cyclical, Trent. And the reason why we ended up buying larger parcels is because, again, due to the cyclical nature of the property market, the duration it takes for you to get all the necessary approvals before you can hit the ground running. You would be more than well aware of this. So it takes roughly the same amount of time to get approval for a 100-lotter subdivision versus a 1,000-lotter subdivision. The bigger you go for, the more efficient you become.
Making use of that time within the half of the cycle you wouldn't be selling anyway. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I suppose with a 100-lotter now, you could probably get through it within a year. With a 1,000-lotter, you could get through it maybe in 5 years with the current market, all dependent on whether you can get contractors to develop your site or not. But again, with that longer pipeline, you ended up getting a higher degree of efficiency when it comes to your overheads, the time it takes to get the property up and running and into the mums and dads for them to build their homes on.
But you talking about those acquisitions in 2010, 2011 and being counter-cyclical, and that all makes sense. But it still doesn't answer why you're putting your money in a totally unsubstantiated, non-planning investigation area, outside frontier area like Whitby, when you probably could have just gone and put that money into, like a lot of other developers at the time, somewhere along the coast north or somewhere in Baldivis or Byford down the road. They would have been less risky for you, wouldn't they, to be able to have a pipeline to go, yeah, most of the planning's done, we can start developing and selling. You've gone frontier, pioneer, and started from scratch.
You're right. When we go to other suburbs, it's probably safer, it's more developed, but the scale of it is also much smaller. So it comes down to maybe 100 to 300 lot subdivision versus Whitby, which is around 4,000 lot subdivision. So again, yes, you're right in that sense, but it goes back to our early conversation when the property project that you have is smaller than you manage to sell out of it in 3 to 5 years' time. Great. What are you going to buy in 5 years' time, Trent?
This is so insightful and something that, we've spoken about off-air before, and it talks to Burswood Point as well, in that something like Burswood Point. These are projects that would span decades in many cases. Your whole career, possibly, something like Burswood Point. And the question I was asking to you off-air was, most people, for example, would do a multitude of developments in their time and see a number of different projects. And your family has decided to put your stake in the ground on less than a handful of mega projects in Perth that will return value over a number of cycles over decades. You don't see many people doing that, and I wonder if that's because most people don't have the opportunity to do that, whether it's a lack of capital or a lack of opportunity or a lack of foresight or patience, or they actually would just prefer to have a number of different projects because they get bored after a while as well.
That, or I would say luck actually comes in quite a lot. So I'm not ashamed in admitting that. Look, I'm a Catholic. I have strong faith. So you make your own luck, or for my family, we believe that it's divine. Because of our strong faith, it's divine showing us the right path, if you want to call it that. But when it comes to Burswood Point, yes, so it's a cracker of a site. It's 3.5 kilometers away from the city, 38 hectares in size. It is the last undeveloped parcels of this scale, of this beauty, with 2.5 kilometers of river frontage within 20 to 30 kilometers of the Perth CBD, only because it wasn't actually zoned to be a residential or mixed-use development. It has always been zoned as recreational use for the Belmont Park Racecourse and the thoroughbred racing.
Let's segue into it, because it could be its own episode itself, to be honest, the story of you acquiring this, but we'll try and cut it down a little bit. You're in your 20s at this point in time, your late 20s, when the opportunity for the racetrack comes up.
Yep, that's correct.
Obviously, still learning the ropes from mum. Mum still being very much involved in what's happening with the business, to a point where I assume you weren't managing director at the time in your late 20s.
Yep.
Still getting your head around developments such as those in Melbourne and what was happening there, and where we put our money in Perth right now, making some acquisitions. And then the opportunity of a lifetime. And I don't mean that with hyperbole. I'm not over-exaggerating when I say that. The opportunity of a lifetime, of a career, and it will take a career of time to develop this, comes up where the racetrack says, yeah, hey, we need money because we're broke. We've got a bunch of land around the back of our racetrack that we have no idea what's in it, how contaminated it really is, what it's worth, or how hard it would be to develop with regards to fill and wetland, environment, and all those things. We're looking for someone crazy enough to buy it off us that's patient enough to develop this over what will probably be decades. And your family jumped at an opportunity in the middle of Christmas to come back to Perth after being on holidays and say, hey, yeah, we'll buy it and we'll figure out how to fund it sometime in the future.
Yes. So I suppose we found out about the site in 2010 through another Indonesian property developer, to which then we've been asked to do a JV, which we actually said yes. So I mentioned to you Christmas, 25th December 2010, my family and I were in Hong Kong going for our Christmas holiday. I got a text saying that deal was off and the opportunity arises for us to acquire it. So we cut our holiday short. We came back on the first week of January 2011 because no one's in Perth, and we had to get contacts to then be able to purchase the land. And we managed to secure that contract actually within a week. I had to work through with the lawyers. I had to work through until 3 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday, and the next day we started at 8 a.m. So I kid you not, we were working in the law firm's office at Central Park in the city. I would go home, I would sleep, and then it's as if you just close your eyes and you wake up again and off you go again, Trent. It's that time. Just get on with it. And that period was quite interesting when we actually heard that state government at that time was interested in putting the stadium at the Belmont Park Racecourse. And you have to rewind back. This is when Subiaco Oval was
still pumping.
Rockaby Road and Hay Street in Subia, still the premier destination for fine dining in WA at that time. So yeah, we managed to secure it in, I believe, February 2011 through contract, but that didn't settle until 2013 because we just had to go through quite a lot of planning approvals because the contract is still conditional upon this being rezoned and all the planning scheme amendments being done. We had to go through local structure plan, so we had to design where the density goes, how much density, how much traffic, you have to do wind studies. Yeah, so that's just a plethora amount of works before you can actually justify that the site is worth developing. And when you mentioned that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that's actually accurate because the last time that this property was sold was actually back in 1940s, and that was from the state government to Perth Racing. And when we acquired it and settled in 2013, again, 70 plus years after the last transaction, it is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
When you settled on it, the property is owned by the Golden Sedayu JV. Sedayu being a very big, powerful, valuable business in Indonesia in the property development space. How did that come about in terms of their backing, and did you know you would have it at the time that you signed that contract?
So actually the shareholding changed along the way. So we had different shareholders back then, Trent, and we were battling through quite a lot of the regulations. And again, it took us actually 8 years in planning.
Yeah, patience.
So you just have to be patient. Not only we had to go through, as I mentioned, rezoning, local planning scheme amendments for Tanah Victoria Park. We had to design our own local structure plan. After that, you still need to do what was called detailed area plan. And they changed the jargon to local development plan now, but it's basically a more detailed study of each precinct. So we have 3 precincts in Burswood Point, precinct A, B, and D. Precinct C is actually the Perth Racing and the racetrack and the grandstand itself. After you have achieved LDP for each precinct, you still have to go through plans of subdivision to subdivide the lot, and you would have to go through and submit development approval for each building. So you can imagine why it's taken us this long.
We're 15 years from when you first signed that contract.
That's correct. So 8 years plus, and then we started our civil works back in late 2018. 1 year plus into the job, COVID hits. And then that's when we put a stop, and I suppose the whole world stopped at that time. During COVID, I ended up staying in Singapore. I got married then. COVID wedding, 50 people only, a tense family. I joke around that I'm probably the only Indonesian that comes out positive after a wedding, because normally Indonesian loves big wedding, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 people, you name it. So I've got 50 people, which I'm really happy with, don't get me wrong. My parents might not, but such is the state at that time. And yeah, from all the red pocket monies that I got from friends and family, I ended up being in the positive. So I think I'm the only Indonesian that actually ended up in the positive after the wedding. Anyway, we ended up in Singapore, and so did the Sedayu guys. And we have known each other for quite a number of years through a charitable organization called Suci, which is pretty interesting. It's a Buddhist foundation. So we are Catholic. We're supporting a Buddhist foundation that supports anyone in need, including Muslim people, because Indonesia is majority Muslim. This organization built schools, hospitals, built houses for the needy. They built mosques for people to pray on, which is just lovely. And I think that's really what helping people is all about, Trent. So we got to know each other through this organization that the family of the Sedayu guys are actually a big supporter of. And again, we got stuck in Singapore because of COVID, ended up chatting. They asked what we were doing, so on and so forth. Then they ended up expressing interest. At the same time, the previous shareholders is quite elderly. And he said, look, it's probably no longer for him. He's in his 80s. So that's when we ended up doing the JV with the Sedayu guys.
So for the better part of a decade, you guys were carrying the costs and the risks of this project mostly by yourselves.
Sedayu is basically Agung Sedayu out of Indonesia, them being the largest property development company in the country. They have done larger scale projects than this, Trent.
Which is hard to believe.
Yes, it is. To give you a perspective, one of their subsidiary built 2 million square meters of buildable area. Give you context, Perth office market is 1.7 million square meters. Somewhere there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it sounds
so they normally do large projects, townships. So when they came in, then absolutely powered everything and to where we are today.
So when we think about that square meterage in the office space in Perth, and we think about what a normal apartment building looks like that we might notice on the horizon, can you now lay out for us what Burswood Point is? Is it just apartments? Are there some shops? Are there some hotels? Are there some houses? How do we get in? How do we get out? What's it going to cost? What's the size of it? Can you give us some metrics?
I'll try.
Yeah.
So Burswood Point, land size is 38 hectares. We can develop around 200 homes and 4,300 apartments, plus 60,000 square meters of commercial office building and a 31,000 square meters of shopping center. In terms of Scale-wise, 31,000 square meters. Claremont Quarter is 29,000, so call it the same size as Claremont Quarter is what we can develop as a shopping center. In terms of number of buildings, it's probably 4 times Elizabeth Quay in terms of size as a total development. I can't give you any figures of what the cost will be. It'll be in the billions. We have to seed 11 hectares of our land as a foreshore. To give you a context, Langley Park is 9 hectares, so we'll have public assets, which we initially thought the foreshore is going to be a burden for us, Trent, but in the end we changed our mindset and thinking that it is actually going to be the jewel in the crown. It will be the thread that connects all of the precinct, and it will be such a huge public assets once we're done, because it's not every day that you get a chance to develop, again, 2.5 kilometers, 11 hectares of foreshore that will be seeded for public use.
It's foreshore that nearly no one has walked on for 100 years. I was so lucky last week to join you walking on that foreshore. There's so much wildlife. We saw a mating pair of eagles past us as we were walking, which was super cool. But it is a phenomenal, pristine waterway there that you otherwise would have had to have seen from mainland, of which most is private property on that side anyway. All of that foreshore is going to have a cycle path. It's going to have some amenity on the northern side for a bit of an entertainment precinct close to the bridge, I guess is the best way to explain it. And you could cycle all the way around that peninsula when it's all done, right?
Yep, that's correct. So definitely there's going to be a huge part of food and beverage and entertainment within the development. In fact, we've roughly designed the shopping centers and what it looks like. It might have a cinema or a bowling at the top, or
both, please.
Yeah, both. Right. Done. We'll have 2 jetties. One is actually approved already in the southeast corner. The other one, we are currently engaging with the state government to see if the place is viable for it to be the second stage extension of the ferry network, because I think the first stage is going ahead, which is great, from Applecross to Nedlands and then to city. Again, only because then I can take the ferry to work, thinking selfishly here. But
people going to the footy would love to be able to pop in and grab a beer on that part of the peninsula as well.
100%. And we actually have a couple of plans for FMBs already that we're working on. We do want to capture that footy and stadium crowd prior to the events, only because I think they are less rowdy than after events. But we've got buyers already at Burswood Point that says that, look, it's their lifestyle, that they are in the late 50s, early 60s. They want to go and they enjoy the events at the stadium. They enjoy footy, ended up just needing to walk to watch the events, get their friends over for a couple of beers, a couple of pizzas along the way, and off you go, Trent.
When we talk about this, it starts to get me excited about the changing landscape. But I guess the next question is, when will we be able to be on the foreshore as a public asset? When will we be able to buy an apartment? Is there development already happening? What can we buy right now, and what would it look like in the next few years? By the time we get to 2030, what could we see on the skyline? As we go south, you see the stadium. As you look left, you see the raceway. And a lot of yellow sand people have noticed for a few years now. Can you tell us what that is?
Yep. So I think people from mainlands are able to see more of our work than most of us driving on Grand Farmer Freeway. But what we've done to date is that we've brought in all of the major services truncation from Rivervale, from that Orong Road, 2.5-3 kilometers out to the site. Why it's taken us quite a while to get it going is because the amount of investment that is required to bring in all of these major services, Trent. Basically, the sewer pipes and the sewer pump station is now completed for the entire development. So it's for the entire, let's say, 12,000 people that will be residing in Burswood Point.
Which is bigger than a lot of suburbs, by the way, 12,000 people.
Actually, it will change the electoral boundary by the time we finish and may command 1 seat in the parliament. Yeah, again, we've brought in all of those major services, truncations. We've built short-span bridge ourselves. We've upgraded the Burswood interchange at Grand Farmer Freeway in conjunction with the state government.
Everything that's been happening there, you guys have paid for, essentially.
That's correct. The interchange is a 50-50 between us and the state government, but other than that, we've paid it all ourselves. We have installed 13,500 unreinforced piles, rigid inclusions, spanning 200 kilometers in length, which If you imagine driving from the city to Busselton, that's the length of concrete piles or stabilization that we've installed in ground at Burswood Point.
So it's like Venice.
It's like Venice. It's like building Venice, but except instead of wooden stakes on the ground, it's concrete. Then you put your textile fabric membrane on top, and we imported 400,000 cubic meters of sand, which I believe will up the stadium up to 6 levels by memory. And that's just to stabilize the site. And then after that, we have to do the subdivision, which again, for North Park is done. So we have 68 green title lots already. We've got lots for about 8 towers now. So the houses are available to purchase, though you might have to give us a bit more time because currently we're constructing the main boulevard, 1 kilometers in length. That will be completed in April or May next year, Trent. So the public will be able to see what you saw last week.
Mid next year.
Yep, mid next year. And what we currently have for sale is the Summers Apartments, 2 towers, east and west, 203 units. They're available for sale. Sunset West is around 80% sold. And Sunset East, which we just launched in April 2025, is probably about 30%.
Who's buying these?
So the buyers profile now for the apartments are probably 60-65% local and 30% overseas. The houses currently is the other way around, where maybe it's 40% local and 60% overseas. I suppose that's only because, again, you can't access the site for the time being.
It's a bit strange in Perth to buy off-the-plan mansions, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. So it's probably a bit unusual to buy a $5 million home on the river off the plan, but for overseas purchases, perhaps they are a little bit more comfortable in off the plans. But with the appointment of the 2 local builders, I have a strong belief that the local market will then able to see what it is that we've been designing.
And who are those builders?
So the builders that we've got currently are Urbane.
We see a lot of that in Applecross and Dalkeith as well.
Yep, so they do quality homes. And we've got CU Building Group, and it's one of their CU Larks, building the garden homes. And I'm still looking for one more for the racecourse homes.
So this is a bit of a call out to builders out there listening to the podcast. If you'd like to be the builder on the racecourse facing homes,
yes.
Andrew is still open to submissions?
On our terms, yes.
Yeah.
But the idea is to get one builder for one topology so that then they can gain efficiencies and improve their quality as the houses gets rolled out. But yeah, what's available now, the houses are actually all available now, and the apartments are available for sale. So come and visit the sales office at 1 Saintly entrance.
Now, you're one of the people developing apartments in Western Australia right now. Who's the builder?
We ourselves, our own building company.
So self-fulfilling their own apartments.
That's correct.
We know that Willing's doing it. We know Edge is doing it. Far East as well. Is there a shared reason? Do we just not have enough builders? Do not trust them? Is it not profitable enough as a developer to give someone else the margin? I would have otherwise thought you'd rather not have to if you could.
I suppose it goes back to earlier comment on rising costs, and since COVID and people just can't predict what the cost will be. I think by going to a third-party builder, they themselves will have to assess what type of risk profile that they'll have to undertake for the next 2-3 years. And sometimes some of those metrics just doesn't make it viable.
They're building in too much fat.
Perhaps. But at the same time, they themselves probably don't know whether that fat's going to get eroded over the years. I'm trying to be fair to them as well here.
Oh, and it's a necessary thing, right? I see standard builders right now who pre-COVID would have been working for just over 10%, just trying to get work. Now, they're not scared of trying to get work. They're scared of going broke with the work. So you see builders at 35% now, and it's the end user who has to pay for that at the end of the day. So as a self-fulfiller, you're actually making the outcome cheaper for the end user.
That's correct. So we got very fortunate to be able to set up our own team. The team that we actually delivered the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, the towers in Elizabeth Quay, and they're finishing a couple of buildings now. I got to know a couple of the guys actually when we did 32 St. George's Terrace with ProBuild. And yeah, so they're now working for us. And so it's a highly capable team, proven team, local team, and we are finishing our piling package this week. So for Somerset, that's 177 piles, which we appointed Keller as the subcontractor. So they're finishing this week, I believe.
And when can I stand on the rooftop?
Completion for Somerset is scheduled for Q4 2027. So that's for the 2 towers. We're going with the 2 in 1 construction cycle. 25 levels, 17 levels. We are now actually drawing our Tower 3 and Tower 4 apartment towers with a view of drawing Tower 5 and 6 probably in the new year.
So what you're doing really is working backwards from the furthest away part of the development around the bend of the river to eventually get back towards the freeway.
That's correct. So that's actually a very tough decision for the group to make, but a very important one. So we started off with the top and the most private part of Burswood Point and working our way counterclockwise. Now, the reason why we're doing this is so that once those sections are done, then the construction cycle will not really be at your doorstep. Yeah. So by the time you come in to your home, you've got your own space to enjoy, a tranquil space.
You don't have trucks driving past you every day for the next 20 years.
If we do it the other way around, that will be the case. So we consciously make the decision to develop the northern part first. And we will then have a separate construction road for the construction vehicle for the next phase, separating them from the residents and the public road. So that way we increase the level of enjoyment for our residents. And two, we increase significantly the level of safety. The interface between heavy construction vehicle and resident vehicle will be absolutely minimized.
And I think the question most people want to know is, when will all of this be finished?
It's a multi-stage development, right? I reckon probably at a very minimum it's 15 years before we will finish. But look, our group is coming out with quite a lot of financial strength in here, Trent. We're putting a lot of money and investment into the project. And as I mentioned, as of today, we don't have any debt on the project. We're coming out with a lot of strength. By the time we finish off the boulevard in April, May next year, we'll have 23 sites for 23 towers. Yeah, we can deliver. We've got our own construction team.
It just comes down to demand. How many people at certain times in the next couple of decades want to live there?
I think demand will be there. You look at the number of properties that are currently for sale in the market. So we are quite unique in the sense that we're not reliant on pre-sales. I don't think a lot of people know that. So we are not reliant on selling the building 50, 60% and then get construction financing, which takes forever. And then by the time you're done with that, then your construction costs and your feasibility numbers might change.
Well, it's the risk that most apartment developers have to go through. It's also the risk that has sent many apartment developers broke.
So that's correct. So we are now flipping the business model on its head, where our pace now will be governed by our construction team's ability in deliver the towers, Trent. So we're already mapped out. I think you asked previously what will happen, what will we see in 2030. I think you'll see about 6 towers at the minimum. That's what we're aiming for. And we'll have a level of amenities in there already, a couple of F&Bs, restaurants, bars, and I would want to put in a smaller sort of a good grocer, 1,200 square meters for people and residents to buy your meat, milk, eggs, and bread.
That's so important. I think when you're 100%. Essentially creating a suburb, you also need to bring a lot of that amenity early too, which is tough because it's not often the stuff that is going to bring the profit early, but it creates the amenity, the outcome that people are looking for to move in the first place. And that's probably one of the criticisms I have of the current Burswood apartment developments. They never really allowed for proper amenity. There's no primary school, there's no IGA, there's no hairdresser, there's no butcher. This is what this development will bring.
100%. So I can talk to you a little bit more on that. So in most cases, large-scale mixed-use development are driven by the government just because of the size and the amount of funds required to develop it and to master plan it. And you look at Elizabeth Quay, the Springs, and CityLink, all government-led. So the master planning all could be done very well, but what happened is then when you ended up selling blocks to other developers, each developer will then want to maximize their profit. And one way to maximize profit is to increase your residential yield and to reduce your underperforming sort of sectors such as the retail, whether it'll work or not. Do you really want to own a hairdresser or a commercial office that you lease out to a hairdresser? So then the master plan then ended up gets watered down in other places where we strategically between the shareholders, we have already agreed that we will hold on to all of the income producing assets within Burswood Point so that we can curate the offerings that we will have within the development itself. So that way, it probably won't make us much money, but it's like building a golf course, and then you don't really make money on the golf course. You make money on selling the land around it, so to speak. So that is the strategy that we'll be employing. So we'll curate the amenities.
It's also highly necessary because you're asking people to move into an area where they don't have any friends currently. There's no family currently. There's no other reason pulling them there. And so you have to create that yourself.
Yes, there's nothing there for now. However, you've got this fantastic foreshore that you can basically just go and walk, and that will connect you right to the train station by the time we're done with that access path, Trent. You do have some level of amenities around East Perth. Mount Lawley is not that far off, and Victoria Park, the Albany Highway strip, the retail strip there is just busy and pumping. Yeah, so I can't really find parking there, right? That's less than 10 minutes from us. But within the site itself, again, I mentioned to you that the more we develop the site, then the more value we're going to bring into our site, our next development phase, and also our residents. Because let's say Paul, I think we mentioned, has done really well at One Subi, fantastic job done by him and his team. But that would bring in and lifted the values of Subiaco around. But Paul doesn't really have any more to enjoy in Subi because he's done, and he has to move on to the next project. Whereby for us, we've got future land holdings there that every time we build and every time we invest in there, we'll create additional amenities, we'll create additional values for the residents and the surrounding areas. Well, you're building something
from nothing, Andrew. And that's probably one of the most impressive parts about all of this is not just the patience, not the ability in the first place to get yourself in the game, whether it's financially or finding the opportunity, finding the partner financially to help along the way too, but the broader holistic foresight of what it is that this can be and being able to execute that in many stages over many years.
Yes. So, look, it's definitely a great development. Location-wise, it's just such a beauty. I could even ask you, like, what do you think of the site, Trent, after you walked it last week?
This is one of the first questions ever posed to me on this podcast, and I'm happy to answer it, is as a member of the public, I guess, driving past, you just nosy around, don't you? You have a little bit of a rubberneck looking left as you quickly drive past on the freeway. You see a bunch of yellow sand. You see a sales office, and you go, I guess they're progressing somehow, but I can't really be sure what's happening or when I'm going to see anything material to the public. But having stood on the site, yes, I can see there are titled lots already on the far side of the track. There are phenomenal views that I think rival or even, if not better than, views that exist around Freshwater Bay, for example. Something different that less than 100 people, I reckon, in Perth would have experienced in the last century. And there's a beautiful outlook to the city as well that most people wouldn't have been able to enjoy. Some from the Rivervale apartments, a kilometre or so back. But this is next level, where you're on this peninsula where not only do you have the river hugging you, but you've got beautiful views of the sunset behind the city, which is so rare in Perth. Normally, you're either looking one way or the other.
And the racetrack, looking lush, as always. The stadium, Madagar Bridge being lit up at night with its colours. And you mentioned Freshwater Bays. I would like to add at probably half the price of those areas, Trent.
That's right.
So
you're paying $10-15 million for that view.
Yep. So, and we mentioned last week as well, find me a riverfront homes newly built at 5 million or under in Perth. It's just very hard to come by. And not only that, then you would have to contend with the ever escalating construction costs. So we're here selling our products. We have green title lots. We can lock in the price. We can lock in the time. We can guarantee some of those completion date. And only because we are large enough to undertake a lot of these risks and bumps along the road. So why wouldn't you want to come in here?
Andrew, I just want to tip my hat to you, mate, as, in my opinion, someone who is clearly understated, very private, and has kept the headlights down for a very long time. Most people in Western Australia wouldn't have a clue who you are, to be frank. Most people know who Paul Blackburn is. Most people know Finbar. They know some of the bigger development businesses. You've done a very good job of staying very private, but people are going to know maybe not who you are. They will know what you have achieved for this state by the time your career is finished, because they will see a suburb having been built and developed by a fella and his mum, essentially, and the team around him. I know you're about to say, very humbly, that people in my position can only look at in wonderment And I know you're uncomfortable hearing this, but congratulations on how far you've gotten.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to see what you're going to achieve over the course of our career, which is how long this will take to develop.
No, thank you for that. And yes, I am actually very private. I feel as if like I'm a extrovert introvert, if that makes sense.
You're a fun guy to hang out with, but also someone that nearly no one would know who you are. You don't have a profile in the same way that others do.
No, and I suppose that's perhaps by design. But you mentioned in terms of the team, look, again, I just want to give credits to my teams and people that we have met along the way that have helped us tremendously along the way. Wouldn't be here without their help. I've got a fantastic team, a solid team. We are 51 strong now, Trent. So again, sometimes some of my own team members don't really know because we're split across 2 offices, one in Adelaide Terrace, one in St. George's. So it's only at
very understated offices as well.
Yeah, Christmas gathering or whatnot that everyone gets to see each other. But yeah, look, just coming back to Burswood Point, I'd like to also mention just in terms of the level of convenience. I stayed in an apartment before in front of Langley Park, Trent, where it is just so convenient to live there. Now I'm moving down south, so it takes me about 30 minutes to get to the office every morning, 30 minutes to go home. So that's 1 hour difference, 1 hour of my time daily for 5 days a week that I lost just sitting in the car and the traffic, right? So that's 5 hours I've lost. So imagine if you live, let's say, in Willerton or you live up in
anywhere
up
in the
north,
western suburbs,
City Beach and whatnot, western suburbs, then it takes you half an hour, 35 minutes to get to the city. So in comparison, if you stay with us, this is my sales pitch.
Go for it, mate.
And if you stay at Burswood Point, then it'll probably take you 5 to 10 minutes to go to the city, really, depending on which part of the city you access. And if I can save you half an hour each way, I can save you 1 hour each day. I can save you 5 hours each week and just save 40 weeks on the year I save you. We just saved you 200 hours of your time living with us or living in a suburb 10, 15 kilometers away. Now, how much is that time worth? No one has ever talked about it because no one can really value time. It's the most important commodities that you and I have, that everyone have. So at 200 hours a year, I would argue that if you're earning, $200,000 a year, that's probably $100 an hour. I just saved you $20,000 a year worth of your time. Now, yes, there'll be strata levies and whatnot, but we're trying to keep that down, trying to keep the amenities to a sufficient level and pushing out all of the other amenities out in the public area. But how do you then quantify? What are you going to do with that 200 additional hours that you're not stuck in traffic? What are you going to do with that? Spend time with your kids?
Yeah.
You're going to go and exercise?
I think that's the post-COVID priority for a lot of people these days. It certainly has been for me. I'm building my family home, not in the western suburbs where we initially bought, but 400 metres from our office in North Perth, simply because I love to be able to be maximum 5-minute walk away from my family at any one point in time, straight to the gym, straight to amenities, cafe strips. As you said, you can achieve the same thing in Burswood. And many people could argue we already have that in other places close to the city, East Perth, for example. But the difference is, I think people will recognise it when they get to cycle along that cycle path. That river view and access, immediate access to the river is really second to none. It's something so special that really at the moment only the western suburbs get to enjoy.
I think there's a research being done by Knight Frank that states within Australia, if you have a view versus no view, the property that has view commands 68% premium compared to the one that has no view, even though you're on the same street. So it's probably, I don't know, take it Duncraig Road in Upcross, let's say. The one with views just commands that much more when it comes to asset values.
Nearly every property in this.
That's correct. So I believe we've done a study where about 85% of the output or of the products in Burswood Point will have a view towards the river, whether it's to the north or to the west or to the east or to the city, you name it. It's 80+%, 85 thereabout, which is quite unique. It is a once in a lifetime proposition that we are very lucky to be a part of.
Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. It's been a privilege to have this conversation, and I know that many people with over an hour of listening here will get so much value out of just your story and the humility, the humble beginnings, to be frank, and it might sound hey, this guy's had a lot of help along the way, but the help has all been self-imposed with a bit of luck and a bit of divinity. From my understanding of this story, I think the most help you've had is some very hardworking parents. And a lot of people don't get that privilege, to be frank. But on top of that, there are so many fantastic, timely, some would say somewhat lucky decisions along the way, as you said.
That's correct.
That have led you to go from triplex developer in Belmont to developer of the most impactful, biggest development we will see in our lifetime, I think. And that's a pretty cool story to hear, I think. And you're still living it. You're only in your 40s.
On that note, we joke around and say that I've got an issue where my own mother and my shareholder is 70s still works harder and longer hours than me. So who are we within my team to complain about hard work and long hours when these guys are just still absolutely crunching it?
Maybe I need to get your mum in here.
Wow. That is if you can pin her down.
Thanks for your time, Andrew.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!